I'm probably going to get some hate for this, and that's totally fine. I'm personally not a big fan of novations, and I'm going to walk you through exactly why we refuse to use them in our real estate business. Let's dive right in. So from a 10,000 foot view, a novation is simply the substitution of one contract in place of a new one. A classic example of a novation would be you have a property that's leased, that tenant wants to vacate, and they've found somebody else that they would like to take over that lease. All parties agree, the documents are signed, and effectively the new contract takes the place of the old one. Another example would be like a mortgage assumption or mortgage novation, in which one party, the seller, wants taken off of that loan. They don't want to be liable for that debt, and somebody else takes their spot. This is very different than like a subject to transaction because everybody is aware and agreeing, including the buyer, the seller, and the bank. So that all sounds kind of on the up and up. So what are the novations that I'm talking about that I'm not a fan of and that we refuse to touch with the 10,000 foot pole? The modern version of novations that you're likely to hear about from gurus online or in mastermind groups is the process of going under contract with a seller for a set price, listing their house on the MLS, and then keeping any proceeds above and beyond the dollar amount that that seller has agreed to. Proponents for novations will tell you like, well, but they're getting more money than what I could have paid them as a cash buyer, so it's beneficial to them, which is kind of true. Where it gets gray is when sellers don't have all of the facts, or they're not even aware that their property is being listed on the MLS. So there's two kinds of novations that I see. One I'm honestly kind of okay with, and the other I'm not a fan of at all. The first is a novation with repairs. So let's say, for instance, you have a seller that has a property that's in severe disrepair. You're coming into the picture, utilizing your own cash or private money, and doing a large remodel to raise the value of that place. So let's say it's a $100,000 house. You're bringing $50K to the table, and you're going to list that place for $200,000. Well, you're risking capital. You're making the property honestly be worth more, and it's kind of a win-win for them and for you. They get more than they probably would have got for it on the market, or more than you could have paid cash, and you get the win of you only had to risk 50, not 150K. Personally, novations with repairs don't really bother me. I have a friend of mine, David, that does these up in Seattle, and they're massive projects. I'm talking $100,000, $200,000 remodels. That's very different than the second type. The second type is a novation without repairs, or where they just do credits. So they simply get the property under contract, list it on the MLS, and then anything that comes up, they're just, hey, we'll give you a credit for that. So effectively, they're not doing any repairs. They're not adding any value. They're really just kind of keeping the seller's equity. Here's why I think this gets really sketchy. First and foremost, there's a lot of verbal gymnastics. I've seen people explain this as like, not, yeah, we're going to list your house on the MLS. There's going to be showings. It's like, I have my preferred pool of buyers, when really it's literally just listed on the MLS, which they could have done themselves with a real estate agent. In my business, I personally refuse to do verbal gymnastics of any kind. If the property's going on the MLS, the seller needs to know it's going on the MLS. The second thing that I don't like is there's often a power of attorney involved, so that way the seller can be removed from all of the paperwork. They're not necessarily signing docs or even aware of what that property is selling for or even listed for on the market. If I have to remove a seller's ability to be involved in the contract for control and to ensure that they can't back out, that starts to feel pretty gross pretty quick. If you're doing a novation without repairs, I don't know how you can argue that that is in the seller's best interest. It really isn't. They'd be infinitely better off having an agent list that property for them on the MLS, issue credits for repairs so they can still sell it as is or don't have to do anything, and keep all of their equity. As a real estate investor and a licensed agent, we walk our clients through both options. Here's what we can give you cash. Here's what it's worth as is on the MLS if you don't do anything. Here's the estimated nets to you on both of those options. Which way would you like to go? I personally don't know how you end up in court on a novation deal and try to pretend like what you did was in the best interest for that seller, especially if you were less than forthcoming with all of the facts. Novations to me sound an awful lot like net listings, which are illegal in 47 out of 50 states. A net listing, if you're not familiar with that term, is when a real estate agent tells a seller they can list their house for X and they keep anything above and beyond that dollar amount. Now, there's a couple reasons why they're illegal. The first thing we run into is the fiduciary responsibility. If you're licensed, you're required to put your client's interests above your own, and there's a very clear conflict in novations and net listings. The second issue we run into is a lack of transparency, particularly if the seller is elderly or isn't aware of what their house could sell for on the market without them doing anything. And finally, I think given the similarity, very, very stark similarity between net listings and novations, there's a high potential here for litigation. The phrase that's going to be thrown out when these are challenged in court is unjust enrichment, or you took advantage of the seller because you were aware of material facts that they did not understand. There's a very strong argument to be made that you have superior market knowledge and you didn't act in good faith. Now, I'm not saying that there's not potentially a way to do these correctly where it's full disclosure, full transparency. I just don't understand why a seller would be inclined to go that way unless you're doing some sort of repairs, demo, or something to add value to the transaction. Oftentimes, a real estate agent could also step in and help with things like demo or odds and ends like trash out, clean out, painting, or even something major like roofing. I like to follow the golden rule when I'm in business, and that's treating people how I would like to be treated. If I didn't know all of the facts and went for a novation, I personally think I would be pretty disappointed or even feel taken advantage of if or when all of the facts came to life. It's kind of like if you've ever traded a car in and then seen it on the lot later for substantially more than they told you they could pay. Kind of hurts, right? As a real estate investor, as well as a licensed real estate agent, I personally believe it's in the seller's best interest to list the property on the market or get help with repairs in order to get top dollar for it if they don't want to sell the property as is for cash. Well, I realize that this is quite a bit against the grain, particularly amongst like influencers in the real estate space. I personally sleep well at night. Thank you guys for taking the time to hang out with me today. If you didn't know about novations, now you do. If you're doing them and you weren't aware of the similarities or potential risks that net listings have, now you do. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe. Again, my name is Ryan Dossey. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll talk to you next time.